Okay, so you guys sent this over, and this confirmation hearing is a lot. I mean, it's like
Oh,
a
yeah.
political thriller and a reality TV show all in one. We're diving into Pete Hegseth's nomination to be Secretary of Defense. And yeah, let me tell you, it is a wild ride.
It really is. It's like someone took like military strategy, political ideologies, threw in a little personal drama for good measure, put it all in a blender and just hit pulse a few times.
Yeah, for sure. This is not your typical, you know what I mean? Like your typical suit and tie nominee you see a lot. Hegseth's background is pretty different. He's got military service, of course. But then he was leading these veterans organizations. And then he was even a commentator.
Right.
That's not the usual path to the Pentagon.
Definitely not. And you can see that in how the hearing goes. You've got senators on both sides really grilling him on everything, from his ideas about warrior culture to some things he said about women in combat.
Wait, hold on. Warrior culture.
Yeah.
What is that exactly?
Well, it's a term that gets thrown around a lot. But honestly, it's not always clear what people mean by it. Hegseth and the people who support him, they use it to talk about things like lethality, meritocracy, and focusing on combat readiness. It's like they want the military to be like this lean, mean fighting machine.
Okay, but some people are saying it's code, like code for pushing back against diversity and inclusion efforts.
Yeah, you're right. That tension is there throughout the whole hearing between the people who think the military should stick to traditional values and the people who are worried about what they see as like a shift towards political agendas.
And it sounds like the things Hegseth has said about women in combat in the past, those are making things even more tense.
Yeah, that's for sure. They definitely come back to haunt him. He tries to clear things up during the hearing, saying that he supports women in the military, but that physical standards should be the same for everyone, especially in combat roles.
So he's trying to find that balance, recognizing what women contribute, but also sticking to what he believes, which is not easy to do in that kind of setting.
It's a tough spot to be in. And then on top of all of that, you've got this whole question of financial management hanging over him. He led some veterans organizations that apparently had some budget problems, and the senators definitely don't let him forget it.
Oh, I bet they were ready to pounce on that.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. Managing the Department of Defense budget, the DoD for our listeners out there, is a whole different animal than running a nonprofit.
Completely different. It's like going from balancing your checkbook to managing the finances of a small country.
Yeah.
Some senators were really worried about whether he has the experience for that.
So what does Hegseth say to that?
He basically says, look, I have a track record of being responsible with money, and he really emphasizes how committed he is to, being careful with taxpayer dollars. But the senators aren't totally buying it.
Yeah, that's a tough one to shake. Okay, so we've got these clashing ideologies, concerns about his experience, and now we're getting into these accusations about his personal life.
Oh, yeah. We're just getting started. Wait till you hear about these allegations. It's like a political soap opera up in that hearing room.
I guess that's what you get when you're going for one of those powerful positions in the world, right? Everyone wants to know everything about you.
That's true. These confirmation hearings are as much about character and judgment as they are about someone's qualifications. And in this case, Hegseth's personal life is a big part of the debate.
All right, before we jump into all that drama, let's take a step back for a second. What are the biggest challenges facing the U.S. military right now? What's the context for all of this?
Well, you've got China's rise as a global power, the threat of terrorism, and the constant challenge of nuclear proliferation.
Yeah, no one's going to be bored in that show.
And those are just the big ones. You've also got cyber warfare, the militarization of space, and the growing use of AI in warfare. The world's changing really fast, and the next Secretary of Defense needs to be able to adapt and lead in situations we've never seen before.
So it's not just about being tough and ready for battle. You need vision and strategic thinking to handle all of that.
Exactly. It's about seeing the big picture, anticipating future threats, and making really tough decisions that could have global consequences.
Okay, everyone, buckle up, because we're about to get into some choppy waters. These accusations against Hegseth get pretty intense, and they raise some big questions about ethics, transparency, and what we expect from our leaders.
Yeah, it's like the whole hearing turns into this courtroom drama, with Hegseth on trial for his past. And let me tell you, the accusations get pretty personal.
Yeah, it's like someone took a political gossip column and just dumped it right in the middle of a policy debate. We're talking allegations of infidelity, questions about his behavior, even rumors about his drinking habits. It's a lot to take in.
It really is. And Hegseth doesn't just sit there and take it. He fights back, calling the accusations baseless smears and saying it's just people trying to ruin his chances.
That's like a total defense mode, with both sides trying to control the story.
Exactly. You've got the people who see him as a victim of political attacks, and then you've got the people who think the accusations are serious and that they raise real concerns about his character and about his judgment.
It makes you wonder how much someone's personal life should matter. I mean, where do you draw the line between looking into someone's background and just spreading gossip?
It's a really tough question. There's no easy answer. I mean, on the one hand, the public has a right to know about the character of someone who's being considered for a powerful position. But then on the other hand, everyone deserves some privacy.
And it seems like these days, that line between public and private is getting blurrier and blurrier.
Totally. Especially with social media amplifying everything, it's so hard to figure out what's true and what's not. In this case, the accusations against Hegseth are, they're fueling a lot of speculation and a lot of partisan fighting, which makes it even harder to have a real conversation about whether he's qualified.
Yeah, it's like the drama's taking over, and the actual policy issues are getting lost.
It's the perfect example of infotainment. The juicy details grab everyone's attention. And the important stuff, like nuclear deterrence or shipbuilding, that stuff gets ignored.
Which is a shame, because those are really important issues. We're talking about the future of the U.S. military and its role in a world that's changing so fast.
Exactly. And those strategic challenges, they don't just go away because there's a scandal. In fact, they make it even more important to have a strong leader in charge of the DoD.
Right. Speaking of those challenges, let's shift gears a little and talk about some of the specific policies that the senators are asking Hegseth about. What are the big things they're focusing on?
Well, one of the biggest concerns is China, specifically China's growing military power, especially their Navy. A lot of senators bring up the fact that the U.S. needs to build more ships to stay ahead in the Indo-Pacific region.
Yeah, I can see why that would be a hot topic. China's been making some pretty aggressive moves in the South China Sea, and the U.S. needs to be able to show its strength in that area.
Exactly. And this gets to the heart of what they call great power competition. The U.S. and China are both trying to be the dominant global power, and the military balance of power is a huge part of that competition.
So basically, shipbuilding becomes a symbol of this bigger struggle.
In a way, yes. It's not just about having more ships. It's about showing that the U.S. is committed to its allies and that it's willing to stand up to China.
I bet the senators are also interested in what Hegseth thinks about how to deal with China's economic influence.
Absolutely. Everyone knows that military strength isn't the whole story. The U.S. needs to compete economically and diplomatically, too, to stay on top.
It's like this web of challenges, and it doesn't seem like there are any easy answers. So how does Hegseth handle all of this? Does he offer any solutions?
He talks about the need for a strong military to deter China from being aggressive, and he talks about working with allies to counter China's influence. But some senators want more details. They question whether he has the experience and the strategic thinking to handle this kind of complex situation.
It sounds like they're really trying to figure out what kind of leader he would be and whether he can think strategically on a global level.
Yeah, exactly. They're not just interested in his policy positions. They're trying to figure out his temperament, his judgment, and his ability to make tough calls under pressure. After all, the Secretary of Defense is responsible for millions of service members and for shaping U.S. military strategy in a world that's facing some pretty unprecedented challenges.
And speaking of tough decisions, the hearing also gets into the whole issue of nuclear weapons. What was the conversation like around that?
Well, there's a definite sense of urgency about modernizing the U.S. nuclear arsenal, especially what they call the nuclear triad, which is land-based missiles, submarine-launched missiles, and strategic bombers. The senators are worried that those weapon systems are getting old, and they want to make sure they're still a credible deterrent against other countries.
Yeah, that nuclear triad stuff sounds pretty intense. We're talking about weapons that could destroy the world.
It's definitely high stakes. And it gets even more complicated when you think about how new technologies could change the balance of power.
Like what kind of technologies?
Things like hypersonic missiles, which are so fast and hard to stop, and cyber attacks that could disable command and control systems. These new technologies are raising all kinds of questions about how nuclear deterrence will work in the future and whether the world will stay stable.
Yeah, it sounds like whoever gets this job, it's going to have a lot on their plate.
No kidding. It's like walking into a pressure cooker, full of global challenges, new technologies, and political fighting.
Okay, before we get too overwhelmed, let's lighten things up a bit. What was the most surprising or unexpected moment in this hearing? Anything that made you laugh or shake your head?
Well, there was this one exchange that really stood out. A senator was questioning Hegseth about his past statements on military spending, and Hegseth used this analogy about a leaky faucet. He said something like, "You can't just keep throwing money at a leaky faucet. You need to fix the problem at its source."
Okay, I admit that's a pretty good analogy.
Right. It was unexpected and actually made me chuckle a little. It showed that Hegseth can think on his feet and that he's not afraid to use humor to get his point across.
So maybe there's more to him than we thought.
There always is. These hearings are just a snapshot, a quick look at a complex person under a lot of pressure.
And, as we've seen, those snapshots can be pretty revealing. We've seen Hegseth's fiery side, his defensive side, and even a bit of his funny side.
It's like a political drama playing out in real life.
And we're not even done yet. We still have to look at what the hearing says about key policy areas like cybersecurity, the U.S. industrial base, and the future of warfare itself. So stay tuned, because this deep dive is about to get even more interesting. Okay, so we've talked about a lot: accusations, global power struggles, even leaky faucets. But before we wrap up this deep dive into Pete Hegseth's confirmation hearing, there are a few more things to cover.
Yeah, it's like we're on this political safari, and we've just spotted a whole new group of challenges.
I like that. So what's first on our list?
Well, one thing that comes up a lot is cybersecurity. Senators from both parties really grill Hegseth on how he's going to protect the U.S. from cyber attacks, especially from those rivals we talked about earlier.
Yeah, it's not just about tanks and missiles anymore. Cyber warfare is like a whole new battlefield, with hackers and bots fighting it out online.
Exactly. And on this battlefield, it's not always clear who's a military target and who's a civilian target. Think about it. A cyber attack could disrupt critical infrastructure, financial systems, even elections. It's a whole new kind of warfare.
So what's Hegseth's plan for dealing with this? Does he seem like he understands technology?
He definitely says that cybersecurity is important. He calls it a top priority for the DoD. He talks about strengthening cyber defenses, developing offensive capabilities, and working with private companies to share information.
That sounds pretty thorough, but does he get into specifics? Like, how exactly would he improve those defenses?
Well, he's a little vague on the details, which makes some of the senators frustrated. They want to know about specific programs, budgets, even how he would structure cyber operations within the DoD.
It's a tough situation. He can't reveal too much in a public hearing, but he also has to convince the senators that he knows what he's doing.
Exactly. And this is where his lack of experience in cybersecurity hurts him. Some senators question whether he really has the technical knowledge to lead the DoD in this area.
Right. It's like asking someone to be a surgeon without ever going to medical school.
Exactly.
And that's something Hegseth faces throughout the hearing. He's trying to seem confident and capable, but people keep pointing out that he's an outsider, not the typical person you'd see in this role. Okay, so cybersecurity is a big one. What other policy areas are the senators interested in?
Well, they talk a lot about the U.S. industrial base, which is basically all the companies and workers that produce the things the military needs.
So we're talking about the factories that build tanks and planes, the shipyards that build warships, the tech companies that develop software.
Exactly. And the senators are worried that the U.S. industrial base has weakened, companies have moved manufacturing overseas, and the government has focused on other things.
I can see why that would be a problem. If you can't produce the weapons and equipment you need, you're in trouble.
Right. And this connects to the whole America First idea that Hegseth and others have been talking about. They say that the U.S. needs to bring manufacturing jobs back and prioritize American companies for defense contracts.
So it's not just about military strategy, it's also about the economy and jobs.
Exactly. It's about making sure the U.S. can support its military, both during peacetime and during conflict.
Okay, so we've got cybersecurity, the industrial base. Anything else?
They also spend some time asking Hegseth about the future of warfare. They want to know how he thinks the battlefield will change and how he'll prepare the U.S. military for those changes.
Yeah, because with all these new technologies, drones, AI, hypersonic missiles, it seems like the whole nature of war is changing.
It is, and that raises some fundamental questions about how the U.S. should structure its military, what kinds of weapons it should develop, even how it defines victory.
So what does Hegseth say about all of this? Does he seem like a visionary leader, someone who can see what's coming and guide the military through these changes?
It's tough to say. He talks about the importance of innovation, embracing new technologies, and the role of human intelligence in warfare. But some senators aren't sure. They doubt whether he can turn those ideas into real policies and strategies.
I guess we'll have to see what happens. If he's confirmed, he'll definitely have a lot to deal with.
He will. This hearing has given us a glimpse into the world that the next Secretary of Defense will face. It's a complex and challenging world.
Well, I think we've covered just about everything. What's the main takeaway for our listener? What's the one thing they should remember from this hearing?
I think the main takeaway is that leadership is crucial. The challenges facing the U.S. military are huge. The stakes are incredibly high. We need leaders who are knowledgeable and experienced, but also adaptable, innovative, and ethical.
I agree. And this hearing has also shown us that the confirmation process is important. It's a chance for the public to scrutinize those who want power, to hold them accountable, and to talk about the values and priorities that should guide our nation's defense. So thanks for joining us for this deep dive. It's been quite a journey, but hopefully you've learned something about the issues and the challenges ahead. And remember, stay informed, stay engaged, and never be afraid to ask tough questions. That's what makes our democracy strong.